Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and welcome back to another season of Eagles football. The 2017, the preseason is here, and I always sort of have some mixed emotions about the preseason. I get real excited for the preseason because we finally have football back, and I start watching a little bit of it, and I realize just how bad the football is, and it just sucks. The football is just not good football. I did a whole rant on it last year. I think it was after the second preseason game last year, just how bad the football was. I'm not going to go through all the reasons why it's bad and the fact that it's a ripoff, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we saw in the games. But knowing what I just said about how bad the football is, just know that I really didn't watch much past the first half of either of the games, and really not even much past the first quarter for either of the games. So just so you know that, my viewing of the games pretty much was limited to when the starters were in. Once they started taking the starters out, I watched for a little bit, and then usually I just shut it off because I think it's unwatchable at that point. So let's talk about some of the things that we saw in the first two games. Wentz looked great in the first game. Obviously, he was almost perfect with his quarterback rating, but he wasn't perfect in my estimation because the ball for the 2-point conversion was a little bit overthrown. I know Aguilar got his hands on it, but really I think it was more on Wentz than it was on Aguilar because I think it was a little overthrown. So that's one small issue I had with the first game. Did not look near as sharp in the second game, but I think some of that has to do with the play calling that was going on as well. And that really gets into another thing that I really want to talk about as it relates to both of these preseason games. And that is, I'm starting to get concerned about Doug Peterson. I know when Doug Peterson was hired, I was a fan of that hire. I did a whole video, what I called In Defense of Doug, that I thought it was a good hire, all things considered. But the one thing that sort of concerned me that last year, and now that I'm starting to watch some of the preseason again, it doesn't look like it's gotten much better, was some of the judgment calls that he made. He made some really bad judgment calls last year in terms of play calling, in terms of strategy, challenging, a play in a game that was going to end up becoming just a matter of a couple of yards and it wasn't going to be the difference in a first down or not. Stuff like that just really sort of made me scratch my head. Some of the play calling that he did was just, I thought, dumb. But then in the first two preseason games, in both games, there were things that I sat there and I just sort of scratched my head. For instance, in the first game, I understood why you go for it on fourth down when you've got your starters in there if you know you only want to play them for one series. It's 4th and 7 on the 42, so you've got it on their side of the field. A punt is probably only going to net you around 22 yards anyway. So you figure, go ahead, let's try and go for it, keep the starting unit out there and see what they can do with it. And ultimately it paid off and they made that. My real head scratcher was the second time you went for it on fourth down, which is when you have it inside the 10-yard line and it's fourth and, just a yard or two, and you're going for it with your backup players, which makes no sense. I don't know why you're trying to go for it with your backup players there. Just take the points and move on. There's no reason to try and go for it with your backups. So I just thought that was sort of a bizarre play. If I would really care about who wins these games, that would have really bothered me because that was sort of a turning point in the game when we didn't get it. The Packers sort of started to take advantage of some things and turn the corner on where we were going with where that game was going in terms of the momentum. So I think that was really sort of a turning point of that game. Ultimately, I don't care who wins these stupid preseason games, so it doesn't matter that much anyway. But that would have really bothered me. Then in last night's game, some of the play calling he made with Blunt was just, I thought, just bizarre. You've got a guy whose strength is the fact that he's a hard runner and he's a big runner and he can use him in short yardage situations, and they have him running sweeps. And no surprise, he lost yardage on those plays. And it just seemed sort of bizarre that that was the strategy that they were going to go with there. The one real good game that Blount had was when they just ran him between the tackles, which is what I think you need to do with him. You just need to run him between the tackles, and I think if you do that, you're going to have a lot more success with him. So he was sort of using a square peg in a round hole there, whereas if you're going to run those kind of plays, that's probably when you want to use, Darren Sproles or Donnell Pumphrey or even Wendell Smallwood. Any of those guys, I think, are going to be better equipped to run those sweep plays than LeGarrette Blount's going to be. So that's sort of some of the questions I really had about Doug Peterson and some of the questionable decisions he's making. Hopefully that doesn't continue, but I'm concerned now that this is a pattern that maybe he didn't really learn from. Maybe he's figuring, oh, well, it's just the preseason. I want to try different things. So I'll reserve judgment a little bit. But if any of this stuff starts coming up in the regular season, I'm really going to start to get worried. The other player on offense I really want to talk about is Mack Hollins. Last night he wasn't near as effective, but in the first game he really showed some promise, and I think that they can really start to use him, especially that touchdown that he had really, I think, showed some of his strengths, the ability to sort of move and be able to get open for Carson when the play sort of breaks down the pocket, and then make some plays, with his size and his strength, and being able to, sort of run some guys over. So I think that that was really sort of helpful in seeing some of that. And I think that also was what led sort of to the trade that ended up happening, shortly thereafter, where they trade Jordan Matthews to the Bills, because I think he sort of, with Hollins' play, that sort of made Matthews a little more expendable. I did start to do a video last week after the game, and I didn't get it finished, and ended up, once it got too far into the weekend and the work week, I wasn't going to be able to get it done. But I did do a portion on the trade that I'm going to go ahead and play now. So here's my thoughts on the trade that we made with the Bills, getting Darby back for Jordan Matthews and the draft pick. So here's that video. Any of you who've watched my videos through this past offseason, especially when I did the draft preview videos, you know that I'm no fan of the secondary that we've got. The secondary we have is really weak, especially at the cornerback position. So we needed to do something to sort of shore up that position on the field. And because of that, I think they needed to try and do something. You couple that with the fact that Jordan Matthews is in the last year of his rookie deal, and it really sort of emphasizes the point that were they going to be able to re-sign him anyway? I know a lot of people have been complaining about the fact that we gave up Jordan Matthews and a third-round pick for Darby, but if you really think about it, what you gave up was you gave up Jordan Matthews and a third-round pick, and you got back Darby and the ability maybe then to sign and use the money you would have used to sign Jordan Matthews to sign maybe one of these other receivers like an Alshon Jeffrey to a longer term deal. Because I think Jordan Matthews has in his mind that he sort of wanted to be paid as a number one receiver because that's what he's been the last few years, even though he's really not a number one. So I think he was going to probably be asking for too much. And because of that, I'd rather take that money that you're going to have to spend on Jordan Matthews to keep him and put it in one of the other receivers. So I really think that that third round pick, while it's a tough pill to swallow, I think I understand why they were willing to do it, because it really also freed up contract money as well. So it's not just the fact that you gave up the third rounder and Jordan Matthews and only got back a player. You got back a player and then a little more flexibility with your salary cap in this coming off season. And really, when I talk about the expendability part in terms of Jordan Matthews, if you really look at the way our wide receiving core was set up before the trade, it was going to have to be some really tough choices I think the Eagles were going to have to make, because they usually go with 5 wide receivers. And if you think that way, then really the 5 wide receivers were sort of set. You had Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Jordan Matthews, Nelson Aguilar, and Mack Hollins. I think those were going to be clearly your 5 guys that you were going to have to go with. You're not going to get rid of, obviously Jeffrey and Smith are the new signings. You're not getting rid of them. Aguilar's too expensive to get rid of on the cap because he would actually cost you more than if you kept him. So you're not going to get rid of any of those guys. Jordan Matthews is obviously the guy you ended up getting rid of. So in theory, you wouldn't have gotten rid of him. And that really leaves Mack Hollins, who looks like a very promising player who can also play special teams. So you're not going to want to get rid of him either. So really what this does is that frees up one of those extra wide receiver slots as well. so that you can take a look at some of these other guys. And you've got a lot of potential players that could be vying now for that 5th wide receiver slot. You've got guys like Bryce Treggs, who looked good the other night. You have, Shelton Gibson, and you've got Mark Johnson, who they've said has looked great in practice. So you've got those guys all in the mix now for that 5th wide receiver slot. And then whichever of those guys comes out of it, you can have both him and Matt Collins now playing special teams, where I think it was going to be hard to get either Jordan Matthews or Nelson Aguilar to play special teams, given, the history that they've had with the team. They've really never been asked to do that. So I think from that perspective, it really allows them a little more flexibility in what they're going to do with their wide receiving core in making roster decisions. It's going to give them a lot more ability to do some of the stuff that they're probably going to want to do with those players. Now let's talk a little bit about Ronald Darby, the player they got back. I'm a fan of the trade because it looks like it could potentially be a really good player. The word on him, he's in his 3rd year. He's going into his 3rd year. His first year as a rookie, he was great. There was one organization out there, I think it was Pro Football Talk, that named him the Defensive Rookie of the Year, his rookie year. So he had a great rookie year, and then last year he sort of took a step back. There's one thing that I've heard over and over again in terms of why he maybe took a step back, and that had to do with the fact that he had some injuries, especially late in the year. But I think the other issue with him, if you look at the defensive scheme in Buffalo, and that is who the defensive coordinator was last year. It was Rob Ryan, who I think is one of the most overrated coaches that there is out there. Everywhere he's gone, the defense has gotten worse. I was a huge fan of his father, but as it relates to him as a coach, I think he's been horrible. I think Rex sort of brought him on to sort of save his brother's career maybe, and that defense ended up going in the toilet last year. So I think overall, it was just a bad situation for that defense. And bad coaching that might have had also a lot to do with the step back that Darby took last year. But all in all, I think it was a great move. We needed to do something at the cornerback position, and I think Darby is going to be a great addition. You've got him now, maybe with Jalen Mills, and then Patrick Robinson can maybe play in the slot as the slot defender, and that's going to be a much better setup at cornerback. And if you look down the road, if you've got someone like Darby and Sidney Jones, now you've really got the makings of maybe 2 really good corners that can be lockdown corners going, not for this coming season, but for the seasons in the future. So fast forward now, and now that we've got to see Darby play a little bit, I really like the move even more because he really just, I think, improves the back end of that defense, something that was concerning me going into, this coming season. He made an instant impact, broke up a pass, came up with the interception on what was obviously a poorly thrown ball. But at the end of the day, he made the play, and I think that's what matters. And, I think it's going to really start to make that defense look good. The starting defensive unit in both games looked solid. And I really think that that's going to become more of a strength than I had thought it was going to be. I think that the fact that now that we've got a legitimate cornerback, and I think we're going to have a really good pass rush, I think that's going to make our defense, it's going to hide some of the deficiencies we do have in that secondary and even in some of the thinness we have at linebacker. I think it's really going to help with that, with having a legitimate cornerback and having a really good pass rush. So I really am excited for what this defense could potentially do. And that means that maybe we won't have to win games in shootouts like I had thought maybe we were going to have to do. So, you might have a game where the defense can steal a game or two. And I think the Darby addition really probably does give us an extra win or two on this season. I'm still going to wait and do, my prediction in terms of wins and losses as we, after the preseason's over with, and I'll do that the week between game 4 of the preseason and game 1 of the regular season. But it's really, I think, shaping up to maybe where we can steal an extra win or two now that we have Darby on the defense. So that really excites me and for where we could go as a team this season. But let me know what you think. Do you think that I'm crazy for actually thinking that the trade was a good idea? Are you sorry to see Jordan Matthews go and you think that that was really something that we shouldn't have done? Are you okay with Doug Peterson's decision making, or are you like me really getting concerned with some of the decisions that he's been making? Let me know in the comments below. I'll go ahead and check in after week 3 of the preseason, which is always probably the most important of the preseason games because it's when the starters play the most. I'll go ahead and check in next weekend after that game. Until then, Fly, Eagles, fly.